In the lifting community, we see all these memes of the short friend taking a breath of gym air and instantly getting jacked and stronger. But do these memes actually reflect reality? Because a lot of people have kind of fallen into this mindset, and it does seem true when you're presented with these very common facts. If we take the example of the bench press and strength, we take this person that's tall, and they're going to have a longer range of motion to lift the weight, which would make the same weight have more distance to travel and have more torque at the top for movement like the bench press, which just means it is generally harder at the same weight for someone that is shorter. However, this is only factoring in the distance that the weight has to move and none of the other factors. Another factor that's very important for how far you can push a weight is going to be your force production. Because your acceleration, which we'll just assume is both to make this easy, and mass will also play a big part in it. A taller person on average will just have more general mass than a shorter person. So they might have to move this weight a little bit further, but they have more mass multiplying into that force production, which does make a really big difference. In using that argument about mass, we realize the distance that you move a weight based on your height is pretty much a wash, because when you're taller, you're generally going to have more mass. And obviously this has a little bit of nuance, but as a general rule of thumb, when we get into range of motion, this has a similar thing to do with distance, but it does change exercise to exercise, because something where the range of motion gets harder as you go further would have a different profile for that taller person. However, that same range of motion that keeps getting harder and harder is also going to create a better and better stimulus. So over time, you're going to have a better stimulus to adapt to that fuller range of motion, which might give you a benefit over someone shorter, but in the end, it's actually just still going to be a wash. And that leads us to the argument of torque. When you push something further away from your joint, there's more torque on the movement, which is another reason why more range is going to need more force production. So this torque is going to be taken care of by the same thing as distance, but it's also going to have that same adaptation we see for range of motion. So if your bench press takes so much more effort to do, it's creating a bigger stimulus to your body overall, and that's going to make up for the shorter distances and all of that in strength very, very quickly. So in reality, the height impact of your strength on compound movements like the bench press is overall generally equal after about 3 months. So this is not an excuse for anybody, and you should just lift like normal, because this is all a bunch of random stuff that makes a funny internet joke. But if it's something that you think is actually holding you back, you need to let it go. Another side of this is going to be the hypertrophy side. A lot of people think that shorter people grow muscle faster, which is somewhat true. If we were to take a tall person and a short person, give them each an additional pound of muscle mass, which would come from the same amount of surplus and everything else equal, that amount of muscle will look very small in this tall person, but have a bigger effect on the shorter person. Now multiply that same effort by 10, and that shorter person is just going to see those results faster. But this argument completely disregards your body's proportion. Someone who is taller, their body is naturally going to want to grow more than 1 pound of muscle from a certain stimuli than the short person would, because their body has more room to grow on their frame, which is why this argument doesn't really make sense after the short term. But when you get steroids and other drugs involved, you never know if things get a little funky. But especially in natural lifting, you have to understand these proportions, because this is why the short person will look like they fill up so fast. The taller person won't. It's just going to take a little more time to get the extra stuff on your frame. But in the long run, you're going to fill out the same amount if you keep putting in your consistent effort. So there might be a little bit of that visual advantage towards a short person, but in the long run, there's no advantage, and it's just about dead even. So going back to the main point of this video, your height genetics do not have that much to do with if you're going to be a good lifter or not. The only times your genetics really come into play can be your muscle insertions, other placements, and your general mitochondria efficiency, not how tall you are. Don't put yourself in this box immediately because you see things on the internet that are supposed to be just jokes that people take very, very seriously, and then try to back up with serious claims that can easily be kiboshed by an 18-year-old on the internet that can understand biology and research better than a random person on the internet can. However, something else really interesting does come up on this, and that's going to be for the taller person being at that larger weight on average, they're going to need to do a lot more effort to kind of get those extra pounds of muscle, because they need to eat generally more food, spend more money on food. Hitting their protein goal is way harder than a shorter person hitting their protein goal just by regular diet standards, and that is an advantage you might have when you're coming in being short. You don't have to use all these protein supplements and kind of lower quality, itchy, grabby stuff, because your surpluses are going to be easier to hit with kind of cleaner foods, and all your protein can be really clean and great because you don't need as much of it, and then also just don't have that need for the other stuff. So that will be one advantage you could get from your height that actually translates to more to do with money than to do with gains, but it is something to take note of. And if you want more videos like this, kind of getting rid of these common internet myths, subscribe for more.